Rob, here, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today and with the students at the University of Waterloo. This, I think, is going to be really valuable for them. We're going to hear about blockchain and many different aspects of it. But just to start us off, you've had a really interesting career so far, from actor to crypto. So what's influenced that path, and what drives Brock Pierce?
Well, I'm a curious mind first and foremost. So the acting thing isn't something I decided to do. It was something I was more or less born into. I started acting at the age of 1. And so my first memory takes place on a set making a commercial for KCRW called "Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys." And then I continued making lots of commercials and a lot of print. I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Target, Sears, Kellogg's, General Mills are all Minnesota-based companies. And when I was growing up, they only hired locally. So we were one of the larger acting and modeling markets in the US, but not for like film and television, for commercials and print. And like most kids in Minnesota or Canada, as the case may be, I grew up playing hockey. And so Mighty Ducks, Disney decided to film Mighty Ducks back in Minnesota. It's cheaper to hire locally. And so if I hadn't booked a role in that film, it probably would have been time to throw in the towel. Fortunately, I did book a role. I got to play young Emilio Estevez, young Gordon Bombay, and all the flashback scenes, opened up the movie, I guess making me the first duck, quack, quack. Booked a few more, every local movie that came to town at the time, and then Disney eventually flew me out to LA to film Mighty Ducks 2. I moved to LA and ended up making a bunch of films as a kid. As I grew up a little bit, I eventually, started thinking about, do I want to be an actor? Is this what I want to do? Now that, I start to become a sovereign being and start to make decisions for myself. And I was also a very entrepreneurial kid. I was building every lemonade stand business, imaginable. I was selling software in school by 2nd and 3rd grade. Just lots of lemonade stand type businesses. And so in the world I grew up in, I wanted to be the producer. I wanted to be the entrepreneur that was pulling the pieces together and figuring out the financing and, making something out of nothing. And so I started dabbling with independent film production when I was 15, 16. And when I was 17, also having been an avid gamer and user of computers, I saw the internet taking off. This is 1996, 1997. And startups were being funded, and this internet thing was going to be a big deal, and it was becoming all the craze, kind of like blockchain today. And so I ended up meeting some entrepreneurs and pitched an idea about building what you would think of as YouTube today, Hulu, Netflix. The idea was to create original programming for the internet. We made up words like webisodes, to license and repurpose, content. Think Hulu distributing it through a digital mechanism. But also user-generated content, which is why I say those things. And but this is 1997. We raised $88 million. I was 17, 18, 19 at the time. We were going to go public. And then when the internet bubble burst in the spring of 2000, we went out of business like the other 99% of every startup at the time. We go through these cycles.
Absolutely.
But for me, that was business school. We raised 88, spent 96. I learned what not to do.
Yeah, you were prepared early for being a technology entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I've been in the internet space since the early days. I don't look that old, but I'm an old timer by most. I just got started very young, and so I also have been an avid gamer, as I mentioned, and so I recognized in online games, as persistent games were being made, persistent world-based games were being made, that the assets that you accumulated, that you acquired through playing the game, could be transferred to other players. And because the games were persistent, when you logged out and you came back in, those things still existed. And so as a result of that, they started to have value. People were willing to spend money to buy, strong or powerful or special or rare objects that existed in these game worlds. And so I started making a market for them in 1999. That eventually became my full-time focus in 2001 and onward, and I started building exchanges, and I became a market maker for virtual currency and virtual goods inside of games. And that became actually a very big business as games like World of Warcraft and Second Life and other things emerged. We built up a supply chain of 400,000 people, primarily in China, that would play games professionally to mine digital currencies that we would sell over the world. I think we had sales probably of around $20 billion. So it was a meaningful business. We were PayPal's largest merchant for more than 3 years. We were Google's largest advertiser for a little while in the beginning. We launched platforms like Alipay, and I became very familiar with payment systems and cross-border transactions and doing business globally and, custodying virtual goods and, a lot of the things that have benefited, the work that I do today in this space. But that was the next sort of major thing that I had done in my life. Went off and started lots of other businesses. I'm a curious mind. I see things and I want to learn how they work and want to go play with it and want to go do it. But that's kind of the background that led me to where we are today.
Fascinating. And to hear you talk about it, it sounds logical and reasonable that it would take that progression, but also quite unusual. There aren't many people who would have ended up on that path. So for people who might be watching who know very little about blockchain, could you give them a quick introduction to it? What it is, how it works, and how you think it might impact the world?
Well, it started with Bitcoin. Bitcoin was announced. The white paper was released in 2008 and launched in early 2009. So this is an industry that's really only been around for 10 years. And in the early years, used by very few and very few people aware of it, even its existence. And that first use case was to create internet money, to create math-based currency. We say on the US dollar, in God we trust. In this particular concept, it's in math we trust. Algorithms and math that's transparent with no central authority. A system that is decentralized or where the power structure is distributed. And so that was really the basis where it all began. And then what we eventually figured out as an industry is that we could build things on top of that decentralized infrastructure. If you think of the blockchain as an operating system, or like an iPhone, think of Bitcoin as the first app. And so we can build lots of other things on top of that decentralized distributed infrastructure. So we eventually built a thing called Mastercoin. So if you think of Bitcoin as like TCP/IP, Mastercoin was the application layer, or HTTP, so that you could build other applications other than Bitcoin on top of it. And as we went down that path, we realized, all right, well, Bitcoin as a blockchain was designed with a very specific use case, but we can do more. And that's why other platforms like Ethereum were released. The idea of building smart contracts and building language, into that platform so that you could write smart contracts. Eventually, that was like, okay, well, let's build a smart contract layer. Eventually, it led to, well, can we rebuild the internet itself? Can we rebuild an internet that solves for a lot of the problems? So the internet today, I would argue, is broken. The internet today is broken for a couple of reasons. The main one being that it's not secure. When the internet was first being architected in the 60s and 70s, the cryptography to secure it was known, though the computer processing power at the time didn't exist to implement it, and call it the powers that be didn't want it secure either. They wanted backdoors in it. So when the foundation of the internet was being laid, it was consciously designed to be insecure. And when the technology caught up to secure it, it wasn't implemented. And by the time, people might have wanted to secure it, it was too late. Too much had already been built on top of it. So think about this from a construction perspective. We built the internet on top of a faulty foundation. It's like building on top of sand instead of concrete. And so the entire internet is insecure. And we see more and more and more of that as hacking becomes a bigger and bigger problem. And now that we have state-sponsored hacking, now that nation states are realizing that asymmetric warfare is a big deal, and we don't fight wars in the same way we used to with, soldiers and bombs and, boats and planes and, asymmetric warfare. Warfare is now conducted, with currency. It's economic warfare and communication, and attacking the underlying infrastructure, the technology, and the communication systems we use. That having a secure internet is actually very important, because it's not just like blockchain trying to like steal your information. It's now state sponsored and sanctioned and supported. So securing the internet has now become a very big deal. And the problems that we experience as nations and as people by not having it secure are going to become bigger and bigger problems. And so it's my belief that the blockchain is the security layer. I mean, what is a blockchain? A blockchain provides a couple of specific features. It has a couple of very specific attributes. It's a distributed system, so it's a distributed network rather than a centralized network. And what that does is it makes it very resilient. We have a very, very resilient infrastructure. It's also an immutable infrastructure, meaning whatever happens on that infrastructure is permanently recorded. You can't go back in the database and manipulate the data. You can't edit. You can't go edit and change. Whatever happened today at this moment in this time is forever written down and, call it a permanent log, a persistent log that is immutable by nature. So facts become facts, truths become truths. And so it's an immutable system. And again, it's a decentralized system, meaning there's no central body or central authority that can go in and edit. And this is why centralized systems have those. It's also a very, very secure system. It's by its architecture, it's designed to be very, very, very secure. So when I talk about a new internet, the new internet's going to have not just blockchain, it's going to be a stack of systems that enable that. But I believe the blockchain is going to be the security layer that secures the new internet and provides for that immutability and that resilience. And so I believe the internet as we know it is going to go away, and a new internet is going to emerge that can do far more than our current internet. I would describe our current internet as the internet of information, because it's really only good for moving data. It's a communication system. We can't put elections on it. We can't put money on it. We can't put anything of real value on it because it's not secure enough, and because it's editable. It's not immutable. It's nothing there is time stamped and immutable by nature, and it's not secure. So this new internet, because it's secure and because it's immutable, we can start to do far more with it. It's the internet of value. It's the internet of everything. It's the internet that does all the things the internet today can't do, because we're solving for the major problems that exist with the existing internet. So we're going to go through an internet upgrade, and the blockchain is going to be a core tenet of it.
So presumably this security is important for transactions, but also a distributed internet would be less vulnerable from a privacy point of view. There wouldn't be huge stores of information. Rather, information would be distributed much more widely. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's most likely the case. It's permission-based, right? So we may volunteer certain information, but so that information by design would not be private. Some information might be very private. It depends on what that information is. And some information may be very public, but the identity of the user might be very private. And so there's a bunch of different ways that might exist depending upon what application we're trying to build, or what problem we're trying to solve, or what it is that we're doing.
Okay, and people watching this who hear about blockchain, Bitcoin will come into their mind first. So with cryptocurrency, I thought we might talk about this a little bit, but you've been very interested in that, and you see it as an alternative to traditional currency. Why is it important that there be this alternative?
Why is it important?
Why is it a good alternative to traditional currency?
Well, think about, most people don't know what currency is. In the same way that we breathe air, we breathe oxygen, and it just kind of all works. And we take it all for granted because we don't really need to understand how it works. In the same way that we don't need to know what's in our phone to be able to benefit from it. Money is very similar. We all know, we all use it, we all benefit from it, but not often enough do people say, what is it? What is money? Where does money come from? What is its origins? And so money has obviously been around for a very, very long time. as further back than we have recorded history. And it served a number of important functions. But what made money money? The primary form of money for the last 5,000 years has been precious metals, specifically gold, silver, copper. But why gold, silver, copper? Those were not, it's not by accident. It wasn't like those things were just picked and that became the standard. Those things, those commodities or those precious metals had very, very specific attributes that made them an ideal form of money as compared to everything else that existed on the planet. And that is that it had to be sufficiently scarce. You wouldn't want to have a truckload of it to buy a loaf of bread. So you needed something that was scarce enough that a small amount of it could represent a meaningful amount of value. So scarcity was very important. It had to be malleable. You had to be able to take it apart and put it back together again. It needed to be non-spoilable. You wouldn't want to put it in a safe and open it up a year later and it's rotten and falling apart. So it had to have real good durability, right? Non-spoilable. It had to be malleable. It had to be fungible. Diamonds are not a good form of money because not all diamonds are the same. There's a big variance between one diamond and the other, and you have to be able to use it as a very fungible asset. And back to scarcity, things like transportability. And so those are the reasons why those precious metals became the primary form of money. Until really the last 50 years. The entire financial system of the world today is arguably a 50-year-old experiment. Money as you know it today is younger than many people alive on the planet as we know it today. Money started to have its first real big change in the early 1900s, in 1913, with the emergence of what was called the Federal Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve of the United States. And that is where the US government started to print bills that corresponded to gold that was held in a vault. And so in your original dollar bills, it said this bill is, exchangeable for gold. But they created a thing called fractional reserve banking, where they said, we've got $1 billion worth of gold. We have $1 billion worth of gold in Fort Knox or in a vault. So we're not going to just have $1 billion, dollars. We believe that we can have more dollars than there is gold. We can borrow against that so that there's more money in the system. And so instead of having $1 billion of gold and 1 billion tokens or 1 billion pieces of paper, let's have 2 billion. Let's have 5 billion. Let's have 10 billion. We don't actually have to have, because not everyone is, there's not going to be a run on the bank. We can have more money out there than we actually have assets to back it up. And this is how most of the banking system works today. They take in deposits and then they lend out more than they have in the form of mortgages, and they get leverage. Eventually, in the early 1970s, there was too much money printed and not enough gold to back it up. And so the Federal Reserve went to Nixon and said, hey, we've got a problem. Basically, we don't have enough money and we've got a problem where we can't back this up with gold and there's really no way to fix it. And so there was a little thing called Bretton Woods in there too, which played an important role. So to go back into the 1930s, the US made a decision to make the US dollar the world reserve currency. And that's what came out of Bretton Woods. I'm not going to take you too far down that path. You can research that on your own time. But the reason why the US dollar is the world reserve currency is because of decisions made at Bretton Woods. But fast forward to, we came off the gold standard in the early 1970s. And that's where the dollar no longer was connected to gold. Essentially, the US government defaulted on all of its obligations. Because up until that point, your dollars were exchangeable for gold. And from one day to the next, all of a sudden your dollars were exchangeable for nothing. I mean, that is essentially a default on all of your debts. Basically, sure. The US government had a systematic default on all of its monetary system and its entire monetary policy. And normally you would think there'd be riots. You'd think there'd be revolution. Literally all your money in your bank account from one day to the next one from being worth something to being worth nothing.
Yep.
And everybody got up the next day and said, business as usual.
They could still spend it, right?
Yeah, because you could still spend it. It was still spendable, but there was this systematic default and everybody kept using it and everything was fine. And then other governments around the world said, wow, they got away with that. Well, we should do the same thing. And so what happened is, following the delinking of the gold standard, the rest of the world did the same thing. And that's where the creation of fiat money as we know it today came from. And so governments now issue paper, which are essentially secured by the tax revenues of the companies and the people that exist, in those nations. And so that is what money is today. Now, fast forward to 2008 and 2009. Now that it's not backed up by anything, and you have, call it, very poor governance, we often have money being printed and without much thought to, how could that ever be repaid? And so the monetary system is in a 50-year experiment. We almost collapsed, 30, 40 years into that experiment in 2008, 2009. And I could make an argument that the current financial system today is only 10 years old, because we're essentially in version 2.0 of that system that went from 1.0 in 2008 to 2009. We went through an upgrade because we almost collapsed. And I could make an argument the entire financial system of the world is only 10 years old. So as you think about it from this perspective, once you get this global macro view of monetary systems, why do we need something like cryptocurrency? These are all experiments. And I think experimentation is a good thing. The idea of having a monetary system where you have a very small number of people that make decisions in dark rooms, opaque decisions, generally with good intentions. This is not a criticism of anyone. That's one type of system, and that is the system we have today. This is an alternative system that says, instead of having people make a decision, what if everybody voluntarily agrees to a system that's built on transparency and a math-based set of rules? And I'm not saying Bitcoin is a good thing or a bad thing, but it's an interesting experiment. And I think experiments benefit everyone. And so that's what's going on here, is new systems of governance, new monetary systems are being experimented with, and they might be important one day. We, the people, may benefit from it one day. And so you may like it, you may not like it. It may not be for you, and that is your choice if you choose to participate. And I would equate Bitcoin to something more like gold. I would say Bitcoin is more like gold 2.0, but arguably better in a lot of ways. So when I mentioned before what made precious metals a historical form of money, those attributes, Bitcoin possesses all of those attributes, but on a scale, it actually is a better version of almost all of those things. The only difference between gold and Bitcoin that really matters is it's intangible versus tangible. And I would argue that tangibility is a defect, not a positive attribute. The only time that tangibility is of a benefit is if the internet were to go down, if we were going to have no internet. Then all of a sudden, if your phone isn't working and the internet's not working, clearly you want something you can feel and touch and hold. But in a world where we have reliable communications, it's far better to have something that you can send anywhere in the world and divide malleably, instantaneously at no fees. It's instantly malleable and it costs nothing to break it into a piece. Its transportability can go anywhere in the world nearly instantaneously. When you start thinking about the benefits of intangible versus tangible, assuming you've got a reliable infrastructure, a resilient infrastructure, it's better. And from a scarcity perspective, as the price of gold goes up, we can dig more out of the earth. In the case of Bitcoin, it's a very finite amount that will never increase. And so it's really, Bitcoin is a play on gold and historical forms of money, and bringing some of those historical systems back using new technology.
Okay, and you said it was people's own choice whether they would invest in it. We've seen quite a lot of volatility in it recently. And, do you think that it is something that will become more stable, or is it sensible for people to invest in it? And if they do think they want to, how would they go about it? How does someone get involved in it?
Well, so I never give anybody investment advice, and I never tell anyone to go buy something. I believe that's the only thing I advise people to do is to invest in themselves. To invest in themselves in terms of
good advice.
Learn, invest in yourself by becoming informed. And as an informed being, as an informed individual, then making decisions for yourself that make sense for you.
Great advice.
And so, obviously, if you're not interested, you're not interested. So I'll go down the path if you are interested. First of all, you should never invest more than you can afford to lose. This is still an experiment, and it's still in the early stages of this experimental development. And so I would not invest something more than you can afford to lose. 1% or less than 1% of your assets is a good starting point. Start small and learn. And then as you do that, you'll become more informed, and then you'll be able to make better decisions for yourself, which might mean that you want to own none or more. But, I wouldn't allow FOMO, or the fear of missing out and seeing lots of other people making money, be your motivation. That trap and being motivated by greed normally will only get you into trouble. It normally doesn't serve you. So move at your own pace, and be thoughtful and be methodical in the decisions you make, and go smaller than you think, not more than you think typically. And eventually you'll become very confident in the decisions you make because you become very informed. And as you go up that learning curve, you'll be well on your own way. The advice I give people as the first thing, because there's not just Bitcoin, there's lots of tokens. The first piece of advice I give people to learn is take a look at the top 10 tokens. And if you're going to invest a small amount of money, call it $100, invest in 5 of the top 10, by $20 of each. The process of learning about the top 10 and then having to choose 5 of the top 10, 5 over the other 5, that exercise all by itself, even if you don't invest anything, just going through the exercise of choosing 5 of the 10 is one of the best learning lessons I can ever encourage someone to do. I mean, you will know more than most people that talk about Bitcoin once you've completed that one exercise. And once you go buy that first $20 of each, you're going to learn a lot about how to do it. And you're not going to be playing with a sum of money that you can't afford to lose, where your life is going to be negatively impacted if you do. And you're going to start out by going to, an exchange to buy Bitcoin. And those exchanges that hold Bitcoin normally don't hold all of the top 10. So then you're going to have to learn how to take Bitcoin from that exchange to another exchange that may have the other token that you're looking to buy that might not exist on that first exchange. And that process. And then what you also want to do is not leave your money at the exchange. You want to withdraw your money from the exchange, and so you have it in your own wallet. Because exchanges are like banks, where you leave your money at the bank to protect your money for you. The problem is Bitcoin exchanges are not guaranteed and protected by governments. If there's a problem with your Bitcoin bank, there may be no recourse. Banks have things like FDIC, but by the way, banks also are not that much safer than Bitcoin exchanges. In 2008, 2009, the government was able to bail the banks out, and we got lucky, but we got very close to losing all of our money. And if you live in Latin America, Argentina has a systematic default on its economy every 7 to 10 years, meaning you wake up sometimes and you log into your bank account and it says 0, even though you had $1 million there yesterday. And you're like, what happened? This happens in countries all over the world, where people wake up one day and their bank accounts say 0. This is not just a problem in Bitcoin. This happens with government issued money all over the world all the time. Mm-hmm. Hasn't happened in Canada, hasn't happened in the United States, but that doesn't mean it won't. Mm-hmm. And it does happen around the world on a somewhat regular basis. So it's wise not to leave your money at the bank. It's wise to put your money in your wallet and to secure it, and make sure you learn how to do that. Start with very small sums of money until you're very confident in your ability to manage and secure your money. When you're confident enough to become your own bank, when you're confident enough in the technology that you feel comfortable in being able to secure your own wealth in a way where you have full control over your money. That is one of the benefits of this technology.
Okay, so basically what you seem to be saying, as I hear it, is that Bitcoin's risky, that at the same time, you're saying that people shouldn't do things where they don't understand the risk, and that you're giving them a path where they can, at less risk, very small risk, learn about the risk that they might be getting into and make an educated decision. And that seems, a very good advice to be able to give them. I'm glad that's, I'm interpreting properly what you're saying. Okay. Sounds like good advice to me. And we did have a bit.
Anyone that says the opposite is, someone you should be wary of.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
most people will tell
we
you
did.
something very different.
And I believe we had an exchange go down in Canada over the last few days. The guy who ran it died, and his passwords died with him, apparently.
That seems to be the story, though. It's a very suspicious story.
Yeah.
It's unclear whether what we're being told is the truth.
Yeah, we don't know for sure he's dead.
Yeah, the facts and circumstances are suspect. Not to say that truth isn't the truth, but one other potential truth is that the exchange was insolvent, mm-hmm. and had already lost the money, or money may have been embezzled, or money may have already been stolen. Crypto may have been stolen, and this person, or the founder may have falsified his death, may have bought fake death certificates, all sorts of things. Who knows what the truth is? I suspect we will find out over time, hopefully.
But hopefully for the people whose money's there. And
it's a big sum of money. We're talking about like $190 million.
Yeah.
On missing.
Yep, it's quite a bit, it would seem. Okay, to turn to another thing, which I'm really keen to hear about.
Just before we close out on that.
Yeah.
This is why you don't leave your money at the exchange. When I said don't leave your money at the bank, take your money out of the bank and put your money in your own vault. But make sure you've learned how to create your vault and how to secure your vault.
Yeah.
And make sure that if you were to die, that you have a process for the things that you want left in your will and passed along. Make sure that you've done these things the right way so that can happen. And there's a learning curve there, and it's not insignificant. It's like learning to use the internet for the first time. Yeah. It's like learning how to send email for the first time. There's a process, but as you do it, you'll get better and better at it.
Sounds good. Okay, the next thing I wanted to cover was your crypto community in Puerto Rico. Fascinating. I've read a bit about it, but I'm very interested in it, and I'm keen to know what it's all about. It's going to be a crypto community. So can you talk about what that is, why it's different from a non-crypto community, and and why people would want to live there?
Yeah, so I see Puerto Rico right behind you on the map. So Puerto Rico, I'll give you a quick little history lesson first. Christopher Columbus sailed across that Atlantic in 1492, but he set up shop in Puerto Rico in early 1493. Puerto Rico became the headquarters of the New World. All of Europe's influence on the Americas, North, South, and the Caribbean, began in Puerto Rico. All of Europe's influence on the indigenous people of the Americas began in Puerto Rico. It's ground zero. And the reason why they set up in Puerto Rico is that was the headquarters of the most advanced civilization in the Caribbean at the time, known as the Taino people. It's also the southernmost apex of the Bermuda Triangle. And so this was that sort of spiritual place where the community of Tainos across the Caribbean would all aggregate. It was the capital of those indigenous people. And then obviously things expanded, throughout the Americas, both north and south. In 1898, Puerto Rico became part of the United States, and it's been part of a U.S. territory since then. Started as a Spanish colony. And so Puerto Rico today has a population of about 3 million people. It has incredible weather. It's warm all year round and consistently, 70, 80 degrees. It doesn't really change. It's always perfect. It has a rainforest. It's the only part of the United States with a full-blown rainforest. It's like the rainforest of South America. Beaches everywhere. As a U.S. citizen, you don't need a passport to travel to it. It's part of the United States. You don't go through customs or immigration. So for Americans, it's very accessible. Much easier to go in and out of. It's using the same U.S. dollar and all these sorts of things. So very convenient for Americans. Some of the other nuances, though, Puerto Rico has its own constitution. So it's part of the United States, but it has very different rules from the rest of the United States. For one, it's the only place where U.S. citizens can live and pay no taxes, no federal taxes. American citizens that live in Puerto Rico pay no federal income tax. They pay no federal capital gains tax. So that's a very interesting nuance, one that is interesting to a lot of people. This is something that not a lot of people know about, and I've made a lot of people angry in sharing this knowledge. This was a secret only for the most elite Americans, and they kept it a secret for themselves. And I've definitely upset a lot of people by kind of blowing the lid off of this very secret piece of information, because I've made a lot of people afraid that the laws may change because I've made people aware of the law.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, so that's one interesting thing. And so what am I doing in Puerto Rico? It's not for taxes, though paying less taxes I'm okay with. But I live my life in service, meaning whatever I have, I intend to give away and use for the benefit of others, which is what taxes are ultimately for. So taxes are not what motivate me, but it motivates others. And so I make sure to use that incentive to help others that care about that. I've been in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space for a while, and I've done a bunch of things in the space. And as a result of that, I came to realize wherever I go in the world, it doesn't seem to matter, but wherever I go, lots of people will show up. If I'm in New York, lots of people show up in New York. If I'm in London, lots of people show up in London. If I go to Paris, lots of people show up in Paris. It doesn't matter where I go in the world, lots of people are willing to travel. And not just anyone. People with intellectual capital, people with human capital, people with financial capital, people with spiritual capital. And so when I came to the realization that wherever I go, people will go, that became a responsibility. That became an obligation for me. San Francisco doesn't need my help. New York doesn't need my help. I'm not going to move the needle by bringing more people to those places. They're doing just fine. They have an abundance of people showing up and bringing all the forms of capital all the time. New York, Hong Kong, etc. And so the obligation for me was, when I realized that I'm a vortex of sorts that brings people together, let me go out into the world. Let me go somewhere whereby my being there could potentially help that place and help those people. I ended up in Puerto Rico in 2014 to start a bank, because in 2013 and 14, it was very difficult for crypto companies to get bank accounts. The banking cartels didn't want to give bank accounts to crypto companies. And that's for a variety of reasons, which I don't need to get into. Not all bad. Regulations more than anything else. And again, regulations aren't all bad. They generally are there with good intentions, but like some things become outdated and need to be upgraded and updated. They stop serving their original function or intended objectives in some instances. But you couldn't get bank accounts. And so I said, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I've built lots of things. How about I buy a bank? How about I start a bank? And so throughout 2013 and into 2014, I looked at buying state chartered banks, federally chartered banks, tried to figure out how co-ops work and credit unions. And I was pulling out my hair going, this is so hard. It costs so much money. It's going to take so long. What do I do? What do I do? I'm like, wait, I'm a hacker. There's got to be a back door. And then I'm like, wait, what about the US Virgin Islands? What about Puerto Rico? What about Guam? What about Samoa? And literally I got told by a friend, like within 24 hours, are you familiar with these Puerto Rican tax rules? I'm like, no. He goes, well, the guy that promotes this stuff would like to talk to you. I'm like, yes, please. So I jump on a call with him the next day, and he's like telling me about the taxes. I go, I'm not interested in the taxes. I mean, I'm happy to pay my taxes, whatever. I'm not going to move somewhere to save money on taxes. I go, but what I am interested in knowing about is banking. Are there any rules in Puerto Rico that will allow me to set up or buy a bank that I could bank U.S. crypto companies? And he goes, as a matter of fact, there is. The tax laws are called Act 20 and Act 22. He goes, there's another law that was part of that same legislation known as Act 273. I said, what's Act 273? He goes, it allows you to create a new type of financial entity. It allows you to create a new type of bank that allows for offshore banking in Puerto Rico, as well as U.S. onshore banking in Puerto Rico. The only thing you can't do is bank Puerto Ricans. because the Puerto Rican incumbent banks didn't want any competition. So that was one of the things put in the laws. You can create these new banks in Puerto Rico, but you're not allowed to bank Puerto Rican customers. But you can bank the rest of the US and the rest of the world. I'm like, that sounds great. I jumped on a plane and I went and started a bank down there in 2014 called Noble Bank that became the biggest crypto bank in the world. And I was already familiar with all the rules in Puerto Rico. And so I told a bunch of my friends in 2016 and into early 2017 that we're going to move to Puerto Rico the end of 2018, December 2018. Put it in your calendar. We're going to go try and build a community, and we're going to go try and figure out how we can be helpful in a place that needs some help, in a place that was the first state, but isn't the 51st state, but has become the forgotten state. And the tax incentives are going to be very good for you. And they're like, really? And they're like, yeah. I couldn't get anyone to move there without the tax. I mean, I get a handful of people to move there without the tax incentives. People want to do good. People want to be helpful, but not at the expense normally of themselves. So when the stars align and it's good for me and it's good for you, when it's win-win scenarios, that's when it's easy to motivate people to make big moves, like packing up and moving their lives. And so when Hurricane Maria hit, I said, well, so much for December 2018. I guess we're going to go early. And so packed up and moved to Puerto Rico. And, I'm confused. I barely know what I'm doing. But the goal is to figure out how to be helpful in all the ways we can. And the things that we've identified and the things that I believe are already being helpful is Puerto Rico's got the number 15 engineering school in the United States. The University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. NASA, Google, Facebook, more or less have full-time recruiters there because there's no jobs. And so Puerto Rico's number one export is human beings, really talented human beings. Another thing that most people don't know about Puerto Rico is Puerto Rico has more bachelor degrees per capita than anywhere in the United States. They're the most educated Americans. It also has more artists per capita than anywhere in the United States. Puerto Ricans are talented, but there's not a lot of opportunity there. And so what we're trying to do is create opportunity there so Puerto Ricans don't have to keep moving if they don't want to. Right now, most Puerto Ricans with the means to leave do because there's a lack of opportunity. And so we're trying to help, the startup community, help the co-working facilities, help the accelerators, help the incubators, help the co-living facilities, help call all the angels, angel investors, that is, bring down the experienced entrepreneurs, bring the mentors, and help Puerto Ricans that have all the talent in the world, help them build things back home if they want to, so they don't have to keep moving to San Francisco or New York if they want to build something. And so that's one of the areas in which we've been helpful. One of my main areas of focus has been around agriculture. Puerto Rico imports 89% of their food. They only have 2 to 3 weeks of food, meaning if there was another natural disaster or an unnatural disaster or a combination of the two that disrupts the supply chain, they could run out of food in 2 to 3 weeks. And so I'm very, very worried about food security and food resilience. I lose a lot of sleep over this issue. I have no background in agriculture and permaculture and biodynamic food making and organic growing and all the things, but I'm learning as fast as I can because this is my biggest concern for Puerto Rico. So
how are you going about helping?
And about 500 to 1,000 people have moved down there. A new person moves almost every day. And so, we're having a small impact, but all big things have small beginnings.
And so these are people who, are investors, are people who are going to provide either money or expertise or some other form of help in these areas that you've mentioned. So with startups, with agriculture and elsewhere. Is that basically the model that you've got going?
That's the model, and that's the instructions I give to everyone. Now, some people do, and some people do more than others, and some people do less than others. But I encourage everyone, in a Robin Hood sort of fashion. You're saving all this money on taxes. Please don't let that be just to line your pockets. Take those savings and invest into Puerto Rico, invest into Puerto Rican businesses, invest into Puerto Rican startups, do something good with that money. That is our moral obligation. And so I sternly encourage people to do as much as they can.
And what role does crypto play in this? Is this the aspect that is involved with their finances, or type community?
So it's not limited to crypto, but there's a large concentration of crypto people within this, call it movement. As I said earlier, I think the blockchain is going to be kind of the new framework of the new internet, and it's going to enable a lot of the new things to come. Historically, California is California because it was an early adopter of innovation. Coming out of World War II, the universities, had been very aggressive in funding and supporting research and development for primarily World War II. And that's why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley. It came out of basically the military and military funding during World War II. And California, and specifically the Bay Area, has been a huge beneficiary of having emerging technology there, being part of that, call it industrial revolution, part of that wave. Why is Seattle, Seattle? Because Microsoft was there, and now Amazon. When you look at these cities and how they've become what they've become, it's because they've been beneficiaries of the things that are there. Puerto Rico is not a place that people think of as a technology hub. What were the odds that Puerto Rico was going to become a technology hub? It probably was not part of Puerto Rico's natural path. The likelihood of it becoming a hub for innovation was probably quite low. And hopefully that is one of the impacts that we're having as a community, is Puerto Rico is now on the map as a technology hub, as a place that probably was never going to be one. And hopefully, in the same way that big cities have benefited historically from being tech hubs, hopefully Puerto Rico becomes a big beneficiary, of that over the years to come.
And my understanding, I guess, is that you would like this to be a crypto technology hub, or that is the what would lie at the at the core of what you're doing there. That Puerto Rico would become the crypto Silicon Valley.
Well, one of them. I think this is going to be in more than one place, but my goal is to, provide some of those benefits to Puerto Rico, and not just on crypto, but, a technology hub, experimenting with smart cities, doing, taking advantage of robotics and agriculture and all the wonderful things that technology is able to provide today. And so hopefully this is a holistic sort of movement, but blockchain is clearly one of the most important new technologies. At least many of us agree that it is. And so I don't think it will do any harm. If anything, it will provide, hopefully substantial benefit to Puerto Rico.
I hope so too. I have one further question.
And for the Canadians, it's a great place to visit. I mean, especially this time of year.
I can tell you today, the university.
Spring break.
I can tell you that today the university is closed because we've got an ice storm going on outside. So, it's a good day to be thinking about being in Puerto Rico for sure.
Yeah.
I got one final question, which is, the people who are watching this are going to are mostly engineers and computer scientists. Waterloo, has a lot of them. It's most of what we do. And though not completely, I don't want the other parts of the university to feel ignored, but they're going to be developing the internet-based technologies and applications of the future. And, I'm keen, based on your background, your experience, your knowledge, what advice would you like to leave them with?
Well, not that money should be your motivation. I like to use a Japanese term to tip my hat to Satoshi. It's a term known as ikigai. Ikigai will show you, it's like a Venn diagram with, they normally have 4 rings. I eliminate the bottom ring, but it basically is figure out what you love. Figure out what you're good at, what comes naturally to you, where it plays to your strengths, and figure out what the world needs. The intersection of those 3 things is known as ikigai, or finding your life's purpose. The bottom ring is figuring out what you can get paid for. But I don't think that's relevant, because if you do what you love and what you're passionate about, what you're good at, and what the world needs, you're going to be happy. You're going to be very happy. Life's going to be great. And most likely, more often than not, you're going to make more money doing that than if you made money your focus, because you're following your path and not allowing money to corrupt your path. Your natural path normally will lead to a life of abundance. At least you'll have everything you need and you'll feel good. So I like to preface this before giving the advice, but considering the topic, engineers that take a 2-week course in blockchain normally see more than a 50% increase in their salary. You can go online and do some research, but having blockchain in your resume and having studied blockchain and having any proficiency in blockchain will most likely increase your starting salary coming out of school by more than 50% and make you very employable and highly desirable. Not that, you're going to have any problem coming out of Waterloo, but, it's just something while you're studying this, you should be aware of that fact, and you can go online and research that yourself. There's one group in particular called Kingsland Academy, Kingsland, called the Academy, that does this, and there's a number of other places. But learning how to write smart contracts, learning how to code, some of the most basic things. And on that basis, I'd recommend learn Bitcoin a little bit. You don't need to learn it a lot. Call it just 101. Learn Bitcoin, learn a little bit about Ethereum, learn a little bit about EOS. And if you've done those 3 things, you're going to be pretty well set to be able to have any conversation with anyone in this space, if that's in your path or a part of your path.
Thanks for talking to me today, Brock. I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know the people who watch it are going to find it valuable.
Yeah, well, thank you, Peter. Really appreciate the time. Don't freeze today, and hope to see you down in Puerto Rico sometime.
I'd love to be there.